Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. Once upon a time, in a far-away land, there lived a pretty little princess called Snow White. She had a skin as white as snow, hair as black as ebony, and lips as red as cherries. Her mother, the queen, had died when she was quite young, and some time afterwards her father, the king, married another wife and brought her to the palace. The new queen was very beautiful, but she was so proud and haughty that she could not bear anyone to be prettier than herself. She owned a wonderful magic mirror, and when she stepped before it and said, "Oh, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" it replied, "Thou art the fairest, Lady Queen." But little Snow White was growing prettier and prettier as each day passed, and one day when the Queen spoke to her mirror, it made a different answer. "O Queen, thy loveliness is rare, but Snow White seems to all more fair." The Queen immediately flew into a furious rage and resolved in her heart that Snow White must die. So she called one of her huntsmen and ordered him to take the little princess into the huge forest which surrounded the palace and leave her there to die. The huntsman was a kindly man and was most unwilling to do this cruel deed, but he was too afraid of the Queen to disobey her commands. He took Snow White into the forest, but instead of leaving her in the heart of the dense woods, he took her to a part which was not so thickly wooded, and left her there. Poor little Snow White was very frightened alone in the woods. Darkness was falling, and although she was not in the thickest part of the wood, she was still lost, lonely, and afraid. She started to run blindly between the tall trees, and just when she felt that she couldn't go on any farther, she came upon a clearing where there stood a little cottage. Snow White tapped timidly on the cottage door to ask for shelter for the night, but no one came. She knocked again, a bit louder, but still there was no reply. Eventually she pushed the door cautiously and found that it was not locked. Inside, the cottage was small, but very clean and tidy. There was a table neatly set with 7 little plates, 7 little knives, and 7 little forks. Beside the fire were 7 little chairs, and on the other side by the wall were 7 little beds. Snow White was hungry, so she ate some bread from each of the little plates, and then she felt so sleepy that she lay down on one of the little beds. Immediately she fell fast asleep, and didn't even wake when the owners of the cottage came home. They were 7 little dwarfs who dug for ore all day in the mountains. Every night they came home to their little cottage in the wood, tired and hungry, looking forward to a meal and a long sleep. They were angry when they discovered that someone had come into their cottage while they were out, and even angrier to find that some bread had been eaten from each of their plates. But when they came upon Snow White, sleeping peacefully in one of their beds, they could not be angry any longer, for they had never seen such a beautiful girl in all their lives before. They shook her gently to awaken her, and when she told them about how the wicked queen had tried to kill her, they felt very sorry and said she might stay with them for as long as she wanted. "You can wash our clothes and cook our food and clean our cottage," they told her, "but you must remember that while we are away in the mountains all day, you must not let anyone in the cottage, for if your wicked stepmother finds out that you still live, she may try to harm you again." Snow White loved keeping house for the 7 dwarfs, and for a long time she lived happily with them, always remembering never to let anyone come into the cottage. But one day she was feeling rather bored, and when an old woman came to the door selling apples, she forgot the dwarf's warning and asked her to come in. "For what harm can an old woman do to me?" thought Snow White. But Snow White did not know that the old woman was none other than her wicked stepmother in disguise. The queen had discovered from the magic mirror that Snow White was not dead, but was living with the dwarfs in the forest. Immediately she had started to make plans, wondering how she could get rid of her stepdaughter. At last she had an idea. She would poison an apple, disguise herself as an old woman, and take the apple to Snow White. She chose a lovely, shining, rosy-red apple, which she knew the princess would be unable to resist, and set off for the cottage in the forest. Snow White accepted the apple with delight, and it looked so fresh and rosy that she took a great bite from it. Immediately she fell down, as though she were dead, and the wicked queen went away, laughing gleefully because her plans had gone so well. When the dwarfs came home at the end of the day, they were heartbroken to see Snow White lying so still and so white on the floor. "We cannot bury her in the cold ground," said one. "Oh, no," the rest of them chorused. "Let us make a glass case," said another. "We shall place her in it, and everyone who passes may see the beautiful princess." The dwarfs all agreed to do this, and set about building a beautiful glass case. This done, they laid Snow White in it very tenderly, and carried it to the top of a high hill. Some time after, a prince was riding by, and when he saw Snow White, he immediately fell deeply in love with her. He begged the dwarfs to let him take her back to his palace with him, and when they realized how much he loved their dear Snow White, they agreed. They helped the prince to carry the glass case back to his palace, but going along a rough track, one of the dwarfs stumbled, and the case was jolted. At once the piece of poisoned apple fell from Snow White's mouth. She opened her eyes, and, raising the lid of the glass case, she sat up and smiled at them all. The prince and the dwarfs were overjoyed to see her alive and well, and the prince asked her to honor him by becoming his wife. Snow White consented because she loved the prince on sight, and the prince promised that the dwarfs would be looked after all their lives. So everyone lived happily ever after. Everyone, that is, but the wicked queen, who was banished from the kingdom forever.